both in the public and private sectors. But one issue that differs us, the public sector from the private sector, is that governments face less competition in many senses than in the private sector, and so therefore maybe the urgency of change is somewhat lower, and we have also greater flexibility and ability to set the pace of change under which that will happen. Another major driver of changing the nature of the public sector workforce and the types of policies that govern it are the diverging career paths and job expectations. So before we had a very clear set of professions, economists, lawyers in government, but now that is becoming much more complex. Government is in need of a much greater variety of skill sets, human-centered design, learning officer, HR officers, IT specialists, cybersecurity. So there's a growing variety of the kinds of jobs that are needed in the public sector, and a labor force that can fill those jobs, but we need the flexibility both in terms of our employment contracts and conditions, in terms of the structure of our job classifications in government to meet changing needs and the changing types of careers that we're going to need. And before, traditionally, you would have a long career in government. Government workers enjoy a high level of job security, especially relative to the private sector. But we could argue that those days are gone. We need maybe more openness to lateral moves, horizontal moves, moving to different areas of government, not always staying in the same career, profession, and in the same organization and team throughout government. We're going to need for greater flexibility to respond to the different, more frequent needs and changes of the government policy design and service delivery. Another major drive is the aging public sector workforce. In many OECD member countries, this may be less of a case in Latin America, but we have a large cohort of public sector workers who are on the verge of retirement. And so we need policies for succession management, knowledge management, and new ways and mechanisms to ensure that we are reskilling workers and make sure that they're able to stay relevant in their careers. But also this offers us opportunities in the sense that we can have opportunities for reform and to recruit new skill sets and have a more diverse public sector in our workforce. And the one final element that I'll speak to is that we're now in the era of crises. So we have more and more, we've had COVID, economic crisis, climate change, refugee crises, security, war crises. We are now in the age of more and more frequent crises, which requires a different type of leadership and a type of working together across silos in government in order to deliver these, to address these increasingly complex policy challenges. And this means that we need better HR policies to govern in the time of crises. So not just around leadership, but being able to recruit quickly, being able to be more mobile, transversal, work across silos, having more diverse skills, being able to recruit them more quickly, perhaps more porous public sectors where we're collaborating with the private sector in new ways. So these are all ways that increasingly the public service, at least in the OECD member countries, and I suspect also in the Latin America context, are needing to adapt. So the OECD has a framework called the Future of the Public Service that has three main pillars. And what we see is we envision sort of a mandate for change, a call for change, if you will, supported by our member states, that public services need to become more forward-looking, more flexible, and more fulfilling. And you can find this publication on our website. I'll go into each of these in more detail now. So what we mean by more forward-looking public service is that we need a transition from a public service that is professional. We need to keep that, but also shift to a public service of professions, having many different types of career paths in the public service, not a narrow definition of what a public servant is and does. We need to move from task-based descriptions. So this is what is entailed in the job, to actually recruiting based on behavioral competencies and metacognitive skills that allow for flexibility, and that actually we're recruiting for performance, not just what's on the CV, what is the degree that this person holds, but actually can they deliver on what is needed. So a different way of assessing candidates, both at recruitment, a different way of attracting candidates, assessing them, recruiting them, and promoting them, and training them throughout their careers. We need to shift from a traditional hierarchy of command and control to more inclusive leadership that can work collaboratively, builds collaborative teams and culture, and can work across silos. And we need to shift from rigid operational planning to more strategic planning for example, with workforce planning, and more flexible operational processes. This includes HR, so that we can better respond when needed, and be more forward-looking in our planning for HR, workforce planning, learning and development, etc. And we need the data to do this. We need better people analytics, not just data that is years old, but we need real-time data that we can draw from immediately. We need greater access to our administrative data. We need IT systems that are linked. So our recruitment data, our people data, our HR data needs to be, our payroll data, all need to be at the touch of our fingers, so that we can get a better idea of who's in our workforce, what they know, what skills they have, what they're capable of, where we may have shortages. We can't do good workforce planning without good data. Some of the emerging skill sets that we need for the future are digital, of course, innovative, policy analysis, being able to work in networks, new leadership styles, global thinking, civil servants who can think not just from the point of view of their central government, but also from the point of view of all the diverse regions and levels of government within their own country, to globally, regionally, and internationally. And we need citizen-centered, service-centered civil servants who are focused on delivering good quality services that are actually responsive to citizens and built for citizens rather than built for government, the way government works. I'll just speak a bit more about the OECD framework for digital skills. I encourage you to check out our website, where you can also find this framework, but we've identified some of the core skills for digital skills for the future of the future public sector leaders and civil servants need to have around digital governance. So the high level big picture view, how to organize IT reforms, how IT systems need to support reforms, not support the reforms, not drive the reforms themselves, so that they are actually useful for government. We need digital government professional skills. So the IT knowledge comes in here, AI, cybersecurity. What are the future skills that we need in digital? Digital government, social emotional skills. So again, the human element, this is also linked to the user skills, making sure that there's change management, which is, getting people to adopt new tools, and what are the change management skills around digital that we need to implement the reforms. And user skills, keeping the user, this can be a government employee or a citizen user from any type of service, keeping them in mind, using human-centered design, testing what are the techniques that we can use to build services that are user-friendly and therefore more adoptable, that are responsive to different types of citizens with disabilities, citizens of different regions, citizens with different levels of digital skills. So keeping all this diversity in mind as we build our public services. And so I do encourage you to look at that. That's one of the forward-looking elements that should be at the forefront of any competency framework for the future of any public service. Going to leadership, the OECD also has a framework for what the future of leadership should look like. Values-based leadership, so leaders who are able to motivate and create and think of providing public value. They can manage tensions in different values, trade-offs, know what to prioritize in certain circumstances, how to mitigate and minimize the adverse effects of decisions that, of the costs of decision making, adverse costs of decision making. We need leaders who are open and inclusive, not just within government, different voices within government, their own employees, but also outside, dealing with civil society, dealing with private sector, in order to inform decision making. We need leaders who are capable stewards of the organization, especially in a time of crisis. And we need networked collaborators who are able to work across silos and sectors to deliver. And I'll just speak briefly about our research on resilience. We've conducted evaluations of different countries' responses to COVID pandemic, as well as conducted several case studies on what makes a resilient public sector organization, specifically in the COVID context, but there are lessons that could be transversal to any type of crisis, not just a public health crisis. We learned that a crisis amplifies poor leaders, and poor leaders hurt resilience. So the mechanisms for good, strong leadership were there already. Merit-based leadership, continual learning and development for leadership, promotion based on competency, diverse leadership. Many of these elements are not surprising. They're ones that we've been preaching about for some time, but countries or public sector organizations' inability to implement these reforms had an impact on the ability of governments and ability of administrations to respond adequately in a crisis. We learned about learning and development and how this needs to be a continued emphasis throughout career, not just ad hoc, but a deliberate, ongoing investment. Administrations are not investing sufficiently in learning and development. The budgets on this are low, and it's such a key component to making sure that we're better equipped to handle crises, that the skills are being adopted throughout one's career. And I will just say a word about employee well-being. Proved crucial during the pandemic. If employees' well-being was not at the heart, both physical and mental well-being was not at the heart of the response, then organizations suffered turnover, loss of knowledge, lack of ability to respond. And this is an area where managers need to be equipped to know how to focus on employee well-being in a better way, in a more effective way going forward. These are some of the skills that we need for resilience: better strategic foresight, being able to think ahead beyond the bubble of one's own organization, systems thinking and collaboration. So thinking not just how a crisis will impact my specific organization, but how my organization needs to work with others and is embedded into a broader system. We saw, this brings into question, for example, in the pandemic, being able to work across levels of government. This proved key. So how does my organization have to work within a system to deliver change? Learning as a skill, creative problem solving, motivation, engagement. These are all skills for resilient leadership. I don't want to go into too much about crisis management, but just to stress again that better data, better workforce data, better scenario planning, and more flexible HR policies, quicker recruitment, quicker onboarding, all proved key to organizations that were more resilient during the COVID pandemic. And unfortunately, things like strategic HRM, strategic workforce planning, more, quicker time to hire, reducing admin burden for the HR process on users, on applicants. These are things that we've been mentioning for quite some time, and we just really need to close the implementation gap on these reforms in order to really make the public sector more resilient, the public sector workforce more resilient and able to cope for the future. So I'll move on to the second pillar of our framework, a flexible public service. So there were three, right? Forward-looking, flexible, and fulfilling. I'm on the second one now. So the future of future public service is more flexible in the sense that we're moving from working for just one specific unit to working, a civil servant should see themselves as working for the government as a whole. So I'm not just an accountant in the Ministry of Finance or an accountant in the audit office. I'm an accountant for the public sector. And that means that I should be able to work on accounting in any ministry, in any department, offer value as an accountant as to how my ministry can improve its value for money, its efficiency, and better use of public resources in any context. And so more transferable skills. Working from in an office setting all day long for set hours to being able to work remotely at almost with greater flexibility in the working hours. Focus on traditional training to, I've done my training, I'm done for the year, to a learning culture where you have your traditional trainings, but also you're learning on the office, on the job, in the office, on the job, taking on new projects, stretching yourself to your capabilities and showing motivation to learn. From a slow, generalized recruitment process that's heavily bureaucratic to a faster one that's more targeted, more competency-based, not just check the box, but can they actually deliver? What is their past performance? Can they deliver on the job in the new role? And one of a standard employment modality to a more varied workforce of employment modalities. So this can include, yes, your traditional civil service contract, but one where you're having more secondments, one where you are recruiting part-time, not just full-time, one where you're recruiting using consultants, using the labor market modalities rather than the civil service. So a more varied workforce with the different types of contracts having a better match to the roles that they're used to fill. We saw in the crisis the importance of surge capacity and workforce planning. So, for example, we surveyed our OECD member states, and during the initial waves of the COVID-19 pandemic, you saw, no surprise, given the nature of this public health pandemic, a greater need immediately for personnel, public sector workers working in healthcare. And I'm not just speaking about doctors and nurses and physicians and healthcare workers. I'm talking about in the Ministry of Health, in the different levels of government. They're noted that I have 5 minutes left. So just the message here is that this is where we saw the most need for workers. However, governments didn't have the tools pre-crisis to allow for the mobility. So we saw a lot of temporary reallocation, forced reallocation, fast-tracked hiring, fast-tracked onboarding was not used to the extent that it could have been. And we see good practices such as Australia Public Service Commission, their Surge Reserve program, where they have a group of volunteers, surge reservists, already available before a crisis that have been pre-vetted. We're aware of what their roles are, their skills, their knowledge, and what they can bring, what they can offer in a crisis. And they have a preset employment conditions as a surge reservist that allows their transferability in a crisis while allowing them to keep their salaries, their benefits, and so forth, therefore cutting a lot of the red tape for mobility. So this was a good practice that we should consider for stronger resilience and flexibility in our public workforces. Flexible ways of working. We have here many examples. I've got 5 minutes left, but I encourage you to look at our data on remote work, flexi-time, part-time, compressed working week, trust-based working hours, outcomes-based working. The main message here was that we are now moving to a more varied ways of working, but that managers need support in implementing now, in managing a team and a workforce that has a much more varied working conditions. And also that we need to protect also the employees' well-being, and I'll speak to this about in the next pillar of our framework, and protecting their legal rights to disconnect so that we're avoiding burnout and not overextending our employees. We have a publication on this for the future of remote work in the public service, a guide that governments can use based on good practices for how to develop hybrid and remote work in a specific organization. So that's online, and we encourage you to take a look at that if you're in the process of defining what your flexi work policies will be looking like. I move to the last pillar of fulfilling public service, so a movement towards where everyone has the same rights and is treated the same, to one that recognizes the diversity and individuality of public service. A focus on job stability to focus on purpose and meaning. So yes, you can still have that job stability, but it comes with continued learning and a focus on how your job is really creating value to the public and the organization. And from a very hierarchical organization to one where managers are your coaches and are promoting an employee's development, managing based on trust and outcomes and not on constant check-ins. And this goes hand in hand with the shift to remote work. We have a lot of data that I encourage you to take a look at about the diversity of gender, but also age in the public service and how that varies across different levels of government. In general, women are underrepresented in senior positions, and this became the same for people of indigenous background, people with visible and non-visible disabilities, people of younger age. So the message is we cannot be more responsive to the changes in society if we are not reflecting these changes at our highest levels of government. I encourage you to look at our working paper on diversity and inclusion in the public service and what are the good practices and tools that governments can use for. This is a free working paper on our website. What are the different policies and data and behavioral insights that we can use to nudge towards more diverse public service. We also do a lot of work on employee surveys and note their importance as a tool for measuring and addressing well-being and engagement. So this is data from our latest standard employment module, employee survey module on job satisfaction. You will see that there is a variety of levels of job satisfaction across some OECD member states. If this is an initiative that you would like to join, please contact me because we have the module online. It's a module that you can include in your existing survey and therefore benchmark yourself not just across organizations, but across the OECD on how your own employees are rating their job satisfaction, their sense of accomplishment, and public service motivation, and a slew of other questions that measure in well-being and engagement. It's so important to measure these things, not just to protect, because we want to take action to protect our employees and ensure that they're protecting their physical and mental well-being, but it's key towards resilience, key towards reducing absenteeism, key towards reducing turnover, key towards being able to attract the best and brightest from the labor market. It's just so important all around for the productivity and attractiveness of the public sector. All of these elements are linked to our OECD recommendation on public service leadership and capability. And I'll just, I don't know if my colleague Felicitas is on the line or not to speak towards the our public service leadership and capability peer reviews, which basically use these recommendations. They're peer reviews done by the OECD with other member and partner countries that use the recommendation as a basis to evaluate a country's HR system based on these three pillars: values-driven culture and leadership, skilled and effective public servants, responsive and adaptive employment systems. And we look at each of these areas to in a country's HR policies and evaluate them against the recommendation standards and the good practices in the OECD. And we offer recommendations as to how to improve, what reforms they may consider to improve. So if you're interested in this framework, it's online on our website. It's available in Spanish and Portuguese also. And very keen to explain what a peer review might look like, and the details of that. It takes about a year. It's very consultative, open. It's a very good impetus for reform. It's not just an evaluation, but it brings in good practices and inspiration for how to make important changes. It brings everyone on board with them, and it brings a lot of political backing from having an external evaluator to promote these kinds of reforms. So please do get in touch if that's something you'd be interested in. We've done one on Brazil most recently, and so I don't want to take up much more time because my colleague will speak to the specific recommendations of the Brazilian review in one moment. I do encourage you, here's our website in case you're interested in any of the publications or issues that I've spoken about. We have a toolkit where you can go topic by topic from each of our pillars to leadership, to diversity and inclusion, to skills, learning and development. You can see in each of these pillars on our toolkit what our main pieces of research and data and good practices are. With that, I will hand over to our other speaker from Brazil. I'm not sure, host, if you can advise as to how to hand over to Douglas.
Thank you, Natalia. Hello, everybody. I believe that Felicitas have now just be able to connect with us. Felicitas, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Douglas. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I believe that you can, if you want to continue from what Natalia stopped it, and can jump in later.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Douglas. I'll quickly present. Natalia, could you bring back the slide that we had earlier, just on the last review?
Yes.
So I just quickly wanted to give you a very practical input of the recommendations that Natalia referred to. As we've done recently a review, or we are actually currently doing a review with Brazil, a public service leadership and capability of review, and we were actually just able to present yesterday some of our initial results. So I just wanted to quickly show you what this could actually look like in practice before then handing it over to Douglas to also present us their advances in this area.
Yeah, I have the slide up, but I'm just not seeing it on the screen. I'm not sure if if our colleagues in the audience can see it. I have it in present mode.
Okay. Otherwise, I'll just talk quickly, and then we see if it comes up during that or not. So what we have done in Brazil, sort of making this review very specific to Brazil, is that we've initially started with a very sort of scan of the Brazilian public employment system across the 14 principles of the recommendation, and they're really looking at the advance that Brazil has made throughout the last years, but also looking at further challenges that would still prevail, and developing some very specific recommendations on how to move further in these 14 principles. We've then, in sort of coordination with the Secretariat for Personnel Management in the Ministry of Economy, identified 3 different focus areas. We said this is sort of the 3 key challenges in order to really build a modern and fit for purpose civil service. And it's worth it to really dive deeper into those areas and to look more deeply into the different challenges that remain there, but also some promising practices that already exist and that can be built on. And what we've developed then is that, or the decision that we made was to look further on the challenges that the career system presents, so how to modernize the career system in Brazil, also how to strengthen flexibility through increased temporary recruitment, and lastly, how to really build a modern performance management system that incentivizes the performance of civil servants. And taking these 3 focus areas, what we have done, and this is sort of a feature that every review always has, is to build a dialogue with our stakeholders in Brazil and hold 3 different workshops with some countries, with some OECD countries who've gone through similar challenges and can share also their advice of how they've gone through these challenges and how they've sort of gone through them and then improved on those. Building on that, we have developed a very specific report then with, as I said, very clear recommendations on how to move forward, but particularly as well, which I think is important, we really look at sort of what does exist already and what can be further built on. And following on that, within the next step, what we will do in coordination with our counterparts here in Brazil is that we would develop a very detailed roadmap that is breaking down these different areas of action to see how to implement those. I don't want to talk for much longer, so I'll hand it over to actually Douglas, who's the Director for Careers and People Development in the Secretariat for Personnel Management and Performance in Brazil, to share with you some of the advances within the Brazilian public employment system, but also to give a bit of a review in how sort of the review of the OECD and the OECD framework has helped them as well in continuing this work that they've already started. So over to you, Douglas.
Thank you, Felicitas. Thank you, Natalia. I believe that we have simultaneously translation, so if you excuse me, I will be speaking in Portuguese, but I believe that you will be able to understand it because of the translation. Boa tarde para todo mundo. Queria primeiro agradecer ao OCDE e ao CLAD pela oportunidade. Acho que tenho alguns poucos minutos, então basicamente o que eu vou tentar apresentar aqui para vocês é um pouco desse trabalho que tem sido desenvolvido pelo governo federal brasileiro e como essa cooperação com a OCDE tem nos ajudado a refletir e aprimorar algumas das práticas que o governo federal tem adotado. Imagino que vocês estejam conseguindo ver a apresentação. Acho que primeiro, só para dar uma visão geral sobre o governo brasileiro, aqui são alguns números do governo federal. Então, o Brasil é uma federação em que cada ente da federação tem autonomia administrativa para gerir a sua força de trabalho, né, os seus servidores públicos. Então, o que a gente vai falar aqui é só do governo federal, do nível federal. Eu trabalho no Ministério da Economia, no órgão central responsável pela gestão dos servidores públicos federais. Então, só para dar uma ideia do escopo sobre o qual a gente está falando, são cerca de 560 mil servidores ativos, quase 200 órgãos diferentes, mais de 2 mil cargos diferentes. 87% desses servidores são estatutários, ou seja, eles estão vinculados a um regime específico com garantias especiais para os servidores públicos, similar ao que é adotado em muitos países, com uma proteção adicional, jurídica, administrativa, enfim. No governo federal, nós temos cerca de 160 planos e carreiras, estruturas diferentes para organizar os cargos, as posições, as funções, enfim, espalhados por esses quase 200 órgãos. E só para dar uma ideia de volume, a folha de pagamento anual do governo federal gira em torno de 95 bilhões de reais, o que dá mais ou menos cerca de quase 20 bilhões de dólares, isso no ano passado. Então, isso só para dar uma ideia geral sobre o escopo do governo federal brasileiro. E nós temos, como Felicitas e Natalia anteciparam, trabalhado olhando um pouco para a recomendação da OCDE, olhando para as melhores práticas internacionais. É um pouco reconfortante, porque a gente percebe que muitos dos desafios que aparentemente a gente achava que eram só nossos, são comuns a vários países, são desafios do setor público como um todo. Acho que a apresentação da Natalia trouxe isso muito claro. Então, como que a gente constrói, como que a gente planeja um serviço público para o futuro, olhando para o futuro, mas sendo que o futuro é incerto. Então, tem sido um desafio pensar em vários temas de gestão de pessoas nos países em geral, pelo que temos visto, mas aqui eu vou tentar aproveitar um pouco a estrutura da recomendação sobre liderança e competência na função pública, essa recomendação sobre a qual Felicitas falou, e os 14 princípios que ela traz, né, divididos nesses 3 pilares, para trazer alguns exemplos, são exemplos bem pontuais, mas alguns exemplos de iniciativas que o governo federal brasileiro tem adotado e que esperamos que a gente consiga aprimorar agora com esse trabalho de peer review e de cooperação com a OCDE. Então, essa aqui é a estrutura da recomendação. Eu vou trazer só alguns exemplos em virtude do tempo. Então, quando a gente fala, por exemplo, lá no primeiro pilar de definição de valores para o serviço público, o governo federal brasileiro fez um projeto recente, em 2020, com a OCDE, um outro órgão aqui do governo federal, a CGU, a Procuradoria Geral da União, em parceria com a OCDE, definiu quais seriam os valores do serviço público federal brasileiro, e por meio dessa cooperação foram definidos os valores de engajamento, integridade, gentileza, imparcialidade, justiça, profissionalismo e vocação pública. Então, é importante que esses valores permeiem e sejam incorporados ao dia a dia da administração pública. Esse primeiro pilar também fala muito sobre cultura e liderança orientados por valores, né, sobre o desenvolvimento da capacidade de liderança. A gente tem também aprimorado uma iniciativa de desenvolver futuras lideranças. Então, a gente tem um projeto de formação para futuros líderes, não para aqueles que hoje já ocupam alguma posição de liderança, mas para quem tem, eventualmente, o perfil para ocupar. Então, há um processo seletivo rigoroso, justamente para identificar os perfis mais adequados. É um projeto desenvolvido em parceria com a ENAP, com a Escola Nacional de Administração Pública do Brasil. Um dos painéis hoje no CLAD, inclusive, vai detalhar um pouco esse projeto. Recentemente, também em 2019, foram definidos critérios para ocupação dos cargos de liderança. Em geral, são cargos de livre nomeação, mas recentemente foram definidos critérios mínimos para ocupação desses cargos. Então, também já é um primeiro passo para qualificar um pouco melhor as posições de liderança, o que é fundamental nesse processo de aprimoramento do serviço público, olhando para o futuro. A gente tem, no Brasil, tradicionalmente também, o ingresso no serviço público de forma meritocrática. Então, para os cargos efetivos, a única forma de ingresso é por meio de um concurso público aberto, transparente, impessoal. Temos já algumas iniciativas para estimular a diversidade e a inclusão no serviço público. Então, aqui, 2 exemplos: 20% das vagas dos concursos são reservados para questões de raça e 20% para pessoas com deficiência. Então, para tentar promover essa inclusão e diversidade no serviço público, muito alinhado com esse primeiro pilar da recomendação. Quando a gente fala também de inovação e de uma função pública proativa, 2 exemplos que são interessantes de serem citados é o Laboragov, um laboratório de inovação em gestão de pessoas do governo federal, que também está participando do CLAD e vai apresentar alguns dos resultados. A Semana de Inovação, organizada pela ENAP e por alguns outros parceiros, e que tenho certeza que muitos conhecem, porque é um evento em que são congregados muitos atores e muitas iniciativas interessantes de inovação no setor público. Olhando já para aquele segundo pilar da recomendação, quando a gente fala de servidores públicos qualificados e eficazes, recentemente também, em 2019, o governo brasileiro reviu toda a política de desenvolvimento de pessoas e estabeleceu o que a gente chama de PNDP, a Política Nacional de Desenvolvimento de Pessoas, para que todas as necessidades de desenvolvimento que sejam transversais possam ser atendidas de modo centralizado pela rede de escolas de governo, em especial pela ENAP, para a gente ganhar em eficiência e escala, e deixar para cada organização executar a sua ação de desenvolvimento que é específica, que só ela sabe fazer. Então, é um pouco de focar no que é transversal para que a gente possa atender ao maior número possível de servidores e atender as necessidades da administração pública. Um destaque também é que o governo divulgou recentemente, em 2021, pela primeira vez também, uma sugestão de competências essenciais para todos os servidores públicos e competências de liderança, competências essenciais específicas para a liderança. Então, também para que fique registrado, para que se crie essa cultura do que se pensa, do que se quer de competências quando a gente fala do setor público. Um outro princípio, né, que a recomendação trata é sobre a atração e retenção de pessoas com as capacidades e competências necessárias para o desenvolvimento do trabalho. O governo federal tem investido bastante no projeto de dimensionamento da força de trabalho, que é conseguir olhar e entrar em cada organização, olhar para os processos de trabalho, identificar, de fato, quantas pessoas são necessárias, quais os perfis necessários, qual o planejamento adequado para cada atividade. Então, há uma metodologia central desenvolvida pelo órgão central que compartilha essa metodologia com o conjunto dos órgãos e entidades. E também, ainda nesse sentido, uma iniciativa interessante de ser destacada é o banco de talentos, um banco de talentos centralizado, em que hoje a gente tem mais de 400 mil currículos cadastrados, os servidores é discricionário, os servidores cadastram os currículos se quiserem, e recentemente a gente implementou também uma funcionalidade para que oportunidades de processos seletivos também sejam divulgadas nessa plataforma. Então, a gente consegue gradualmente estabelecer um ambiente em que as pessoas tenham mais mobilidade, em que os perfis possam se adequar aos ambientes e às atividades em que eles sejam mais adequados, e é um projeto interessante que tem gerado bastante entusiasmo aqui. Eu estou passando um pouco rápido por cada um deles em virtude do tempo, mas eventualmente a gente pode aprofundar depois. E, de novo, são só alguns exemplos de iniciativas que a gente entende que estão alinhadas com essa recomendação da OCDE. Ainda falando sobre cultura e ambiente de aprendizagem, né, desenvolver um ambiente de aprendizagem constante. No âmbito daquela política da PNDP, a gente instituiu um escritório de aprendizagem para juntar os órgãos, né, são realidades muito diferentes, atividades muito diferentes entre os diferentes órgãos do governo, juntar os órgãos e pensar em conjunto sobre quais as melhores práticas, sobre o que pode ser aprimorado, como que a gente consegue centralizar em um único local as oportunidades de desenvolvimento, que alterações normativas podem ser realizadas para aprimorar essa cultura de aprendizagem. Então, também tem mostrado resultados interessantes. Quando a gente fala de avaliar, premiar e reconhecer desempenho, talento e iniciativa, há uma discussão em andamento no governo brasileiro sobre o programa de gestão e desempenho, muito associado ao trabalho remoto, mas que vai muito além dele, porque aqui a gente está falando de uma mudança de lógica de controle por assiduidade, por jornada, por hora trabalhada, para um acompanhamento de entregas, e que isso pode ser feito de forma presencial ou de forma remota. Então, a legislação e as práticas nesse tema no Brasil têm avançado, ainda estamos em discussão, acho que é um tema muito novo para todos nós, em virtude especialmente da necessidade que a pandemia impôs de fomentar esse modelo de trabalho novo. Temos também realizado um programa piloto de desempenho de lideranças, então, como que a gente avalia lideranças, às vezes lideranças em altos postos, o que tem sido um desafio e já tem gerado alguns aprendizados importantes, que eventualmente a gente pode compartilhar. Quando a gente fala de responsabilidades institucionais e sistemas de empregos responsivos e adaptativos, o governo federal tem investido bastante na digitalização dos serviços, tanto para fora, para a sociedade, por meio do GovBR, quanto para dentro do Estado, das estruturas da burocracia do Estado. E aqui vale citar o SouGov, que é uma plataforma em que, gradualmente, a gente está incorporando todos os processos de gestão de pessoas para que os servidores possam fazer isso tudo por meio de um aplicativo ou por meio da versão web. Então, hoje, grande parte dos serviços da área de gestão de pessoas podem ser realizados por meio do Solgov, por meio desse aplicativo oferecido pelo órgão central. Isso acaba, inclusive, ajudando as áreas de gestão de pessoas dos órgãos, porque elas podem se dedicar às suas especificidades, elas podem se dedicar a discussões mais estratégicas. Um outro destaque importante, uma das premissas da recomendação é a ênfase na mobilidade, em ter uma força de trabalho com mobilidade para esse cenário incerto e para as demandas emergentes cada vez mais complexas. E no caso do governo brasileiro, tem sido feito um esforço de atualização normativa para estimular alguns mecanismos de movimentação da força de trabalho. A gente tem mecanismos distintos para cada finalidade, mas tem crescido cada vez mais o número de movimentações, como a gente chama, para compor força de trabalho, em que o órgão central realoca as pessoas de acordo com as necessidades do conjunto da administração. Esses são só alguns exemplos que eu trouxe aqui, que existem outros e a gente pode discutir mais aprofundadamente. E esse trabalho em conjunto com a OCDE tem nos ajudado, e creio que ainda nos ajudará, a aprimorar essas ações que já estão em andamento, e já temos discutido outras ações para alinhar cada vez mais o Brasil e o serviço público brasileiro a essas práticas reconhecidas, discutidas, quando a gente vê que é uma discussão que envolve um conjunto tão grande de países, com realidades tão diversas, mas que conseguem chegar a um consenso sobre o que de fato é necessário, sobre o que de fato é prioridade. Acho que é um bom guia que pode nos ajudar e nos orientar sobre qual o melhor caminho a ser seguido, é claro, observando as realidades, as especificidades de cada país. Então, a gente está, só para finalizar, e aproveitando o gancho que Natalia e Felicitas deixaram, a gente está no final de um processo de peer review com a OCDE, em que a OCDE nos ajudou fazendo um diagnóstico sobre a realidade brasileira, com algumas missões de compartilhamento de informações de lado a lado. Então, para o Brasil também foi interessante conhecer a realidade de alguns outros países. Nesse processo de peer review, os 2 países escolhidos foram França e Portugal, né, pela proximidade com algumas questões brasileiras. Então, tem sido um aprendizado. Foram priorizados, como a Felicitas indicou, 3 temas que para o Brasil, para o serviço público brasileiro, são centrais e que merecem um aprofundamento, que é o sistema de carreiras como um todo, as formas de contratação temporária e gestão de desempenho. Então, a gente está aprofundando a discussão nesses temas para pensar que ações, ou que recomendações, que iniciativas podem ser feitas para aprimorar o setor público nessas áreas. A gente ainda tem alguns documentos a serem publicados com essas análises mais completas, mas já temos, ontem mesmo, fizemos uma publicação conjunta dos principais achados, das principais recomendações, o governo brasileiro enxerga como uma oportunidade de fazer mudanças, algumas a longo prazo, para gradualmente tentar adequar o serviço público àquele cenário que Natalia demonstrou, um cenário de incerteza, um cenário complexo, um cenário que muda muito rápido e que o Estado precisa ser capaz de atender. Então, é uma discussão que tende a ser muito rica e tende a gerar insumos para a gente tentar cada vez mais se aproximar de um Estado que consiga responder a essas demandas do futuro. Em geral, eram esses os pontos que eu queria trazer e fico à disposição para a gente poder conversar e aprofundar outros temas. Muito obrigado. I believe that we have a round of questions from the public now. I don't know if Felicitas or Natalia want to make some comment or complement some of the questions that I've presented. I hope everyone understood everyone. I hope that the translation worked for everyone.
Thank you very much, Douglas, for the presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Just checking. Yeah, so a lot of information given there. If there's any questions from the public, we're able to take those now.
I believe that there's no questions from the audience. And I don't know if Felicitas or Natalia wants to dive in some of the questions of the Brazilian peer review.
I think there was I couldn't hear what was said in the microphone, but no, just to reiterate that Brazil is very brave, very brave, because the recommendation was only approved in 2019. So it's really a forward-looking recommendation with standards that are not just for looking backwards at what's the status quo now, but what is expected really for the future. And so Brazil, to be brave enough to put itself forward to be assessed according to those standards, and to do so very openly, transparently, was really very brave and inspirational, and we hope useful for the country. It's when we present the results to our Public Governance Committee and the Working Party on Public Employment and Management, it will be, of course, very interesting for us, for our own members, to learn also from Brazil's innovative practice. You know, they're one of the few countries with competency framework on innovation. They're one of the few countries doing reforms, cutting edge reforms to the leadership, their new laws and so forth. So it'll be interesting also I think that's one element that we didn't convey. It's not just for the country, but also for our OECD membership, to learn from Brazil, to learn from countries who undergo a review. So very grateful that Brazil put itself forward as the first country to be assessed by the new recommendation.
Natalia, and if I may, what has been interesting for us is that we have realized that there is no simple or a unique answer for any of the questions that the recommendation tries to discuss. So it has been a very learning opportunity for us also to see that in some areas we may have to construct our own responses to the challenges, because it's not simply look to OECD or any other country and try to find a bullet silver or a simple answer that will solve all of our problems. So it's been a challenge indeed, but I believe that we have questions from the audience. So.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. Congratulations for the work you show us. It's not actually a question, just to see if Natalia could share with us her email and also the material that was presented today. Thank you.
We can't hear Natalia. No, for me at least, I can't hear. Yeah, now yes.
Not sure why it goes in and out, but yes, I will be able to share the presentation and also please go to our website, OECD Public Employment and Management, and please give permission to the organizers to share my email.
Douglas, você o que acha que os altos pagos dos funcionários públicos, por exemplo, faz uns dias, li uma nota que o Brasil tem o maior pago dos deputados, senadores e na função pública, e você acha que esses pagos têm que descer ou estão bons? Eu falo isso dentro da opinião da democracia, transparência, eficiência.
Nessas discussões sobre o serviço público brasileiro, um dos achados, e que é bastante conhecido já, é que em termos quantitativos, o Brasil não tem tantos servidores públicos quanto os demais países da OCDE, se a gente considerar a média. Então, não são muitos servidores públicos, mas é um serviço público que custa muito caro, se você também comparar a média que é proporcional do PIB. Ou seja, realmente há um custo elevado. E isso gera essa discussão. Será que as remunerações são adequadas ou não? Qual o nível de comparação que deve ser aplicado? A gente tem, realmente, esse é uma das recomendações da OCDE, é um dos achados do estudo, é que a gente tem um modelo no Brasil que tem bastante distorção remuneratória, algumas injustiças tanto internas quanto externas, que foram construídas ao longo do tempo por motivos diversos. Qualquer definição remuneratória, no caso brasileiro, precisa passar pelo Congresso, é uma definição em lei, então são discussões legislativas que podem mudar a depender do contexto. Mas há sim essa identificação de que a questão remuneratória é algo a ser enfrentado. Os países têm adotado modelos diferentes para enfrentar essa questão. Então, Portugal, por exemplo, adotou a estratégia de ter uma tabela remuneratória única e incluir todas as funções e atividades em geral nessa tabela. No caso brasileiro, a gente tem várias tabelas, cada carreira, cada cargo, cada grupo de funções tem a sua própria tabela remuneratória. Então, é uma discussão ainda em andamento, mas é um achado, né, já é um consenso, talvez, dessa discussão com o OCDE, de que é algo que precisa ser revisto no modelo brasileiro para que a gente consiga alcançar um equilíbrio em algum sentido. Não sei se respondi, mas, em geral, é isso. Não sei se Felicitas ou Natalia... Ok. We can't hear you, Natalia, again.
Okay, I'm not sure why. Are there any other questions from the audience?
I don't think so.
No. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present at your very interesting conference. I looked at the agenda. It's extremely ambitious and very envious that I cannot be there in person to attend the sessions with you in person.
Well, I believe that eu queria também agradecer a oportunidade, acho que não temos mais perguntas e o tempo também se esgotou, mas agradecer ao OCDE pela oportunidade e pela parceria que temos feito e pelas discussões que temos realizado. Para a gente também tem sido um aprendizado muito grande. E também queria poder acompanhar vários dos painéis que estão acontecendo lá no CLAD, inclusive em muitos dos casos com os colegas aqui do governo brasileiro.